This is a story about how a group of friends got together and made a movie which ended up becoming a classic must watch for any fan of the rock industry. So, back in 1980s, there was a huge amount of focus on glamour and spectacle, largely due to the economic boom that happened at that time, which obviously led to people having more spending habits and thus having a focus on luxury and excessive things, which eventually led to a strong focus on glamour and spectacle, which most rock bands in the 80s did focus on these things. From elaborate stage setups and flashy costumes that embodied those highly superficial parts of life that were a staple in the 80s, and even the lyrics in the songs heavily focused on a fast life full of fun and recklessness. And there was also the rise of MTV, which you know what that is. So, all these factors contributed to the rock music genre becoming a very mainstream and incredibly popular industry. So, naturally, when something has reached a popularity like that, a studio is going to capitalize on it by making movies like The Fabulous Stains, which is a movie that shows the music industry and the challenges faced by young musicians who want to make it big. And yes, in my opinion, this movie does have a very dedicated fan base who love it to death, but when it was released in the early 80s, it did not perform well at the box office. And these were the sort of movies that were being released in the 80s. Some of them might have been a satirical take on the rock music industry, but for the most part, all of them were grounded in a realistic take on what it's actually like being in a band trying to have a career in the music industry, and most of them did not succeed at the box office, including This Is the Spinal Tap. And the reasons are again pretty obvious. Most of these movies focus on the gritty realism about how stressful and brutal being in the rock industry really is, and not so much on the spectacle. And again, this was the 80s, so that's what people really wanted more of. And movies like Top Gun were the things that people wanted to see more of, mainly again because of the spectacle and the fun of just riding a jet. Although the groundbreaking way it manages to capture all of that might also be a huge factor that contributed to its success as well. This movie is really good, even though it's close to being 40 years old at this point. So the main lesson Hollywood learned from this was that gritty realism was not the way to go. So they pivoted and started making movies about the spectacle and the ludicrously excessive parts of the rock industry. Except they did it after the 80s, in the 90s, and the early 2000s, when people had moved past the excessive glamour. The 2000s were more focused on technology and groundbreaking innovations, hence why movies like Avatar managed to get so big. And although right now it feels like most of the focus is on franchises and shared universes, I still think we have not gone past the innovative and technologically focused era. So naturally, movies like Rockstar and Detroit Rock City, which focused on the spectacle, although they still had somewhat of a real story in there, most of it was abandoned in favor of the superficial spectacles, which contributed to them being box office duds. And now we seem to have gotten a renaissance to more realistic depictions of the rock industry, and more people are starting to watch movies like Walk the Line, where they showcase the struggles of addiction that Johnny Cash had because of the pressure he was under, and it seems like people want to see more of these sorts of things. And also, we are in an age where people really want to know the behind the scenes of everything. We love having a peek behind the curtain of what goes on in certain industries like Hollywood or the music industry, which makes movies that are a satirical but accurate representation of the behind the scenes of the rock music industry, like The Spinal Tap, and how it depicts the desperation of fame while the band is starting to lose relevance, the struggle amongst the band members, the manager just blatantly lying to them about how everything is just fine even though it's not at all. All of these are portrayed accurately yet in a very satirical and over the top way, which just makes the movie a delight to watch. And also, in many ways, these kinds of movies appeal to a group of audience just because of the vast amount of knowledge they have about a certain topic, like the rock music industry, what it's actually presented as versus what it is like behind the scenes, the jokes of this movie, the ridiculousness of how so many movies showcase members of a rock band like they are above everybody else, but here in this movie they are showcased as nothing but a bunch of incompetent buffoons who picture themselves as big deals and are just surrounded by a group of people like their manager who just preserve that image for them, even though they are nothing but a bunch of simpletons who, even when they are trying their best, can only produce a mediocre piece. And the multiple guitars that Nigel has are nothing but for show, to try and convince everybody that he is an expert, and how he hilariously tries to make a few guitars out of the dozen of them feel special by trying to say something about them, but just being too vague about what makes them special, because it's just him trying to look like an expert than actually being one. And it's these kinds of jokes that people who have kept up with the rock industry and have followed some people in the industry and know for a fact that there are a lot of people who are just like Nigel. These people who know a show of spectacle is just a way for the band to try and be relevant, relive their glory days if they ever were popular. All of these just makes this movie specifically appeal to a certain group of people. And it's in this specific appeal towards a certain kind of individual which makes a movie gain a cult following. Take Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, for example. He is nothing but a proto Mickey Mouse, but he has gained a cult following because he appeals to a certain group of individuals who know how Oswald was originally a character created by Walt Disney for Universal Studios and had a very successful animated series. But due to some contractual issues, Walt Disney had lost the rights to Oswald to Universal Studios, leaving him with no character to work with. And hence, when he found his own studio, he decided to create Mickey Mouse as his mascot for Disney. Oswald the Rabbit is just a piece of history that a very specific group of people know about, and thus they feel like he specifically appeals to them and their knowledge of something, which just makes him gain a cult following. And again, there are so many inside jokes into the rock industry, and the humor of this movie appeals to a very specific group of people who know what the rock music industry is really like, and thus it really appeals to them. So it gained a cult following, and also the fact that this movie is a behind the scenes look at the rock music landscape when it was at its peak, and how relevant this is in today's culture ends up making it a modern day classic and helps it gain a cult following. With that being said, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, and if you're a fan of the kind of content that I'm putting out, then make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day. Goodbye.